Welcome everyone to another GCS podcast. This week we have another fantastic guest, Atiyyah Ferouz from Canada, currently living in Thailand. Atiyyah is probably the most prolific cannabis cultivation expert, consultant, and plant scientist across the world at the moment. She's just also been nominated as one of the top 50 professionals in the Canadian cannabis industry as well. And she's very kindly offered to walk us through all of the wonderful work that she does, the wonderful journey that she's been on to get to where she is now, and to unveil a few new creations that she's been working on that will change the future and direction of the cannabis landscape for the better. So Atiyyah, as founder of AgCan and a director now of the ICQSA, how has it been as a Canadian sort of watching the emergence of the Canadian cannabis industry come together? What was that sort of process like, and how has it compared to the journey that you've seen other countries go down at the moment with regards to their cannabis policy, patient perspectives, medical perspectives? What's that sort of evolution been like for you?
When Canada legalized cannabis, I don't want to say that it was like an extreme shock, because Canada has always been a country that's a bit more laxed with cannabis consumption and the use, especially for medical. We've had a medical program for a while. I do remember thinking that it was faster than I had expected, and I wasn't really in the cannabis industry prior to legalization, so I hadn't been following super closely, but I finished my master's in genetic engineering like a few years prior in plant biotechnology. And when cannabis legalized and I realized that there were jobs that I could do and utilize my graduate degree, which for anyone, I think, with a master's or PhD in science, it's always like kind of just a luck if you get to actually use what you learned in school, like, and apply it. So I was really happy that there were positions in cannabis tissue culture. That was the first job that I got in the cannabis space, and I've been in cannabis since then. Watching the legalization in Canada and some of the pros and cons of the ways that it happened, some of the challenges, I'm sure everyone in the world has heard about the fact that we've had to destroy quite a bit of cannabis. There's been losses in the multi-billion dollars. That was one of the reasons why when I started my consulting firm 3 years ago, I became very focused on working in emerging markets, because I think that the more markets that come online and do this really well, the better it is for all of us in the cannabis industry. It doesn't do any of us any favors if markets come online and they don't do well and they don't succeed, and there's a lot of issues and a lot of problems. So for me, being in Canada and being in the largest legally and recreationally and medically legal space, that has been a really unique experience. And then bringing that into the other countries that I've worked in South America, in Europe, now in Asia Pacific, that's been really fun and challenging.
One thing that I ask everyone here is, because of the slightly controversial nature of cannabis, anything, how would you rate your parents' reaction, your family's reaction to going down that route? Were they concerned, scared, perhaps hesitant, or
I don't know.
reluctant to maybe let you go that direction? Or was it just I'm doing this and deal with it, and I'll make it work sort of conversation?
I would say like I'm doing this and deal with it sort of person in general. Not that I do things that are like particularly rebellious, but I moved out when I went to university when I was like 17. So I've been on my own for a long time. My parents are very trusting of me and my ability to make my own decisions. So we had never discussed cannabis use ever, even though I had been using cannabis at the time and had used it previously. But it wasn't something that was super evident, I don't think. And it wasn't something that I think a lot of people associated with me at the time. So I remember my parents being like, well, like, why are you getting into this industry? Kind of as if almost to ask, like, are you using cannabis? And at the time I was still in my early 20s. So I was like, no, I'm just doing this because like it's a great job opportunity and it's close to what I did in my master's. But my parents are very conservative on some things, but surprisingly not on this. So from my actual mom and dad, there was zero pushback. They were just like, cool, it's legal, like have fun. And for the most part, my whole family has been surprisingly good, which is very strange because my mother's side of the family is extremely religious. So I was expecting more of like you shouldn't be doing this. But yeah, my mom's mom, my maternal grandmother, proudly tells people that I deal with drugs as a full-time job. And really the only person that has ever given me any flack for it is my dad's mom. But it was just kind of her saying, you know, I don't believe in this stuff, but if it's your job, then that's fine. So luckily, I never have to hide what I do, and I never have to tell anybody in my family that I do something different. I talk about my job very proudly because I love what I do. And I've been, I'd say, really supported from everyone that I've spoken to.
What about friends, Tia? What is, high school friends, college friends? And obviously, everyone always thinks the most crude and recreational topics when it comes to sort of young people and cannabis and everything in between. What do your friends think? How are they? Have you enlightened them? Have you educated them along the way? Have you had all of the stoner jokes as you've delved deeper into the industry? What's their sort of general take, especially as a Canadian, I guess, and elsewhere?
The stoner jokes are very heavy. My friends live all over. So I have friends who still live in Canada. I have friends that have relocated all over the world. So in some places where they live, it's not legal, of course, but most of them are Canadian, born and raised. So I think number one, when I told people I was working in cannabis, the first thing they said, because of my educational background, was like, so you're going to grow like the best weed in the world. Like that was kind of what they thought I was moving into cannabis to do. And as much as I would love to have my own genetic transformation lab for cannabis, I have not had a chance to do any of that quite yet. I do have a lot of tissue culture projects, which is kind of like the stepping stone to doing that. So maybe one day, but yeah, there's been a ton of jokes. I don't think anybody was super surprised. Like I said, I was a cannabis user for a while before I got the job. So I've always been pretty relaxed and pretty open about that with my friends, at least. My parents know now, but at the time I was kind of keeping that from them because I still felt I was quite young. My friends, I think, are all super happy, and they ask me a ton of questions. So every one of my friends, for either themselves or their parents or their siblings or their cousins, they will message me for product recommendations, and I will go on to the website of their respective province, and I will send them, you know, here's what your mom should be using for this. Here's what you should be using for that. So I've actually exposed a lot of my friends to different product types because I think, especially coming from a very heavily legacy market in Canada, you know, smoking flower was really, you know, 99% of the consumption. And now Canada has these really fantastic edibles and extracts and isolates. And I mean, just so many cool products. I have a couple of my favorites that I recommend for kind of new users. There's it's like a fully dissolvable powder that's essentially flavorless. You can get it in a high THC, a 1-to-1 THC to CBD, or a high CBD. And you can put it in any liquids. You can put it in orange juice, in a tea, in a coffee, whatever you want. So you don't have to even really taste the cannabis if that's not something you're a fan of. And you can infuse at the level that you would like by dosing it out yourself or metering it out. So that's a really good foray because the experience that you have consuming via smoking versus consuming via edibles is very different. So I like to always tell people that there is a cannabis product out there for pretty much everyone. And that doesn't necessarily always mean high THC. It may just be a high CBD variety for you. Or now that, you know, CBN and CBG are getting a bit bigger, those are also possibilities. But I truly feel that there is a perfect product out there for everybody. You just got to find, you know, what chemotype, what cultivars, and then also what mode of uptake you'd like to use.
It's interesting. There's always like a bit of well, especially in the UK and Europe, there's a lot of stigma around cannabis still. And it's interesting. I always find it interesting to see how sort of people react in various parts of the world and what their sort of initial impressions are when it comes to, oh, someone's doing something slightly controversial and very much would have been taboo not that long ago. And it's just interesting to see that sort of transition. Another little question from Canada, Tia. After sort of seeing the best and worst of the Canadian industry, what have been some of your major takeaways from that? And what would be some of the lessons that you would share and impart with people that maybe haven't had the same exposure that you have? Because I think particularly again from Europe looking over to North America, there's a lot of people that maybe see what Canada's done as the haven. That's how it should be done. It's a perfect system. But in reality, how have you found it, and what sort of mistakes and issues have you seen along the way as that sort of policy's been rolled out over the last few years?
I would say the biggest one for sure, and it's a trend that we see in most emerging markets. So the really funny thing, and it's a little sometimes funny, but a bit frustrating as a consultant. We go into an emerging market. We tell them that we can pretty much predict what the next 3 to 5 years is going to look like based on what it's looked like in every single market's first 3 to 5 years, California, Canada, etc. And they don't always heed that advice or follow what we're telling them. But typically what we see is cultivation kicks off. A lot of people get into cultivation. There's a hypersaturation. So then too much product comes to market. The price points kind of get driven down. The quality gets driven down. There becomes this, super high fixation on THC being over, 20%, 25%, 30%. It gets more and more aggressive. Then we see companies go bankrupt. That decreases the competition level. And the companies that really make it to the other side are either ones that have a really, really strong financial backing, or they've run a very cost-effective operation, or they've identified and established themselves as a premium brand where they're still pulling in that craft or higher end price point. So if you're not going to fall into one of those categories, usually you're not going to make it. So one of the lessons learned, I think, from Canada, and every country has done this a bit differently. It's how they grant licenses and how many licenses they grant. So I don't think anyone's quite cracked the code on how to do this, because I know in the States before, I think shortly after Canada legalized, I had 2 consulting projects, which were in 2 different states, and they were going on a lottery system. So everyone brings their applications in, they vet all the applications, all the vetted applications go into a lottery system. I've seen other ones where I believe certain states have said, if you have a previous criminal conviction in cannabis, they're allowing them to come into that first round of lottery. Canada was kind of a free-for-all at the beginning. It was like, if you want to get a license, you can get a license. And at the very beginning, there wasn't even a requirement to have a building. You just had to have a floor plan and they would give you a license. And as time ticked on, they put the requirement to have a full building because they needed to somewhat try to limit the amount of people they were granting licenses to, because they started to realize as well, people were not taking licenses to use themselves. They were taking them and reselling them down the line or doing other things with them. So licensing is a really big piece if you're drafting your own regulations, to think about how you want to fairly ensure that everybody has access to obtaining licenses, but also that you don't hurt your own supply chain by allowing this really aggressive hypersaturation, because nobody wins in that case. When everyone's product is crashing and the prices are crashing and you have a ton of job loss and bankruptcies, that hurts your cannabis economy and your regular economy as well, because people would have left stable jobs to transition into the cannabis industry. So I think that's one of the most important lessons learned, is just being mindful essentially of what your country can actually handle, how much cultivation you really need. I think back to the fact that the last full-time job I had in Canada, I was running a 1 million square foot cannabis greenhouse in Leamington, Ontario, which is kind of the greenhouse capital of Eastern Canada, I would say. So we had a 1 million square foot greenhouse, and like at full capacity, this thing is supposed to churn out like 120,000 kilos a year, like a lot of cannabis. There were on that street alone that I worked on, at least 2 other facilities, also 1 million square foot cannabis greenhouses, another one 20 minutes down the way. Like there was probably 600,000 plus kilos of cannabis production capacity in this one city. And the whole entire Canadian market was using less than 100,000 at that point in time. So this is the kind of thing where I'm talking about, like, it's okay to have like a little bit of redundancy in the supply, maybe a 20 to 30% overage in case crops get lost, whatever. But to have so much, and this is one city in one province in Canada, to have so much capacity, what did you really think was going to be the outcome of that? Like allowing that much license space. So one thing I think back to is before I was in cannabis, I was in dairy, and dairy farms in Canada go by a quota system, which is here's how much liters the entire of Canada needs. Here's how much are for export. Here's how much for domestic. Each farm is granted a permission, a quota for how much they're allowed to produce. And that's it. So I know that Colombia, for example, had, I don't know if that's still the case, it's been a while since I checked in there, but they were looking at a kind of quota-based system. I know that Poland, for example, has very specific quotas for how much you can import. So some countries have caught on that they need to be regulating the supply a little bit more. And I think that's going to be the best path forward for a lot of these newer markets.
Oh, you've given me another question there, but I'll save it for later, Tia. During your sort of cultivation work, how I sort of take it bare bones for people, just so that they can understand what that experience is like as someone going into work in the cannabis industry, what the sort of problems are, what maybe some of the industry trends are, and I guess standards. Did it match your expectations when you went to work in the cannabis industry and got your first role with a cannabis company? And what was that sort of journey like for example, for someone that's maybe potentially looking at working for a cannabis company. How did you find that experience? What would be some tips as well that you'd maybe recommend that people look into a little bit more, or utilize to try and make that transition as smooth as possible and as efficient as possible as well?
For me, I got lucky because I was at a job, like I said, in the food industry, and predominantly what I had done was a mixture of quality assurance, regulatory, some recipe development, sensory tasting as well, which meant I get to eat cheese or milkshakes or poutine every day and like taste the flavors, which was fun. And so when I wanted to move into the cannabis industry, I wanted to do it for two reasons. Number one, it seemed like it was very fast growing, very innovative, and I like to be consistently challenged. And the second was that, yes, I was a cannabis user at the time, and I was super interested to become involved in this industry that I really believed in. So when I went to look for a job, I was like, okay, what skills can I use from the food industry and like transition over? So the first jobs I ended up applying for was actually like quality assurance technician. So like a quality assurance associate, like a pretty low level quality assurance person, because, I didn't have any cannabis experience. I'd never done anything at a cannabis company. So when I went to apply for that job, the person that I spoke to was at a job fair. She asked to see my CV. And when she saw that I had a degree in plant biotechnology and tissue culture, she asked if I would be comfortable like working in the tissue culture lab. And I said yes. So I went in for an interview, assuming that I was interviewing for the technician position. And then the management team just really liked me, and they actually made me the head of the lab. And then I got to work with these really fantastic scientists. Some of like still friends with some of them to this day. And it was a really good experience. But that was really luck, to be honest. The other route would have been that I started off really low level QA and worked my way up. And that is how it is for most people coming in the cannabis space. So you will probably start off in a super low level position unless you have very, very similar applicable experience that you can move over. So for example, if you have experience in supply chain management or something else, accounting, for example, that, it's a pretty one-to-one transfer, that's fine. But something like cannabis cultivation, like if you want to be a cannabis grower, you might have like legacy market experience, for example, that you could use. But for the most of the time for commercial cannabis cultivation, if it's a new market, nobody has that experience. It's brand new, right? So those are some of the positions that are harder for us to hire for. So many companies, and for some of my clients internationally, we do recruit from Canada or the US or Australia, somewhere where they've had a bit more developed market. So what I would say is that pretty much every cannabis company in a new market is a startup. Like that's just how it's going to be for the next 3 to 5 years, rapidly evolving and changing. Startups come with a lot of very specific challenges. It's very much building the plane while you're flying it. So you have to be very malleable. You have to not get very upset when plans change like on a dime and everything flips on itself. Like I've literally gone to bed and woken up and then the entire strategy of the facility has been changed between one phone call between two executives. And we're like, okay, that's just going to be how it is. So don't get too emotionally attached to anything because it can very likely change quickly. But it also means that you can have really rapid growth. So when you come into a company, the upward trajectory in a startup is typically a lot faster than it would be in an established company. I had a good job in food, but to be honest, to reach like a high level executive team, it would have taken me like 10 or 15 years. And when I switched to cannabis, by the time I was in upper management, it was a year and a half. So it just allows for this really rapid development. But there are now available, and it's very different than when I started, almost 6 years ago, but there are now available cannabis training courses, cannabis certificates. I teach at a cannabis college in Canada. So this can give you that extra edge. So when people are looking at applications, there's now education that you can actually have that you can put on there that will help you be maybe a little bit higher than sort of that entry level. But a lot of people do have to start from a relatively low position and work their way up, especially if it's something that you can't really get professional experience in because it's new in your country.
How essential would you say a plant science degree is to being able to be a more effective sort of cultivation expert and just all-round knowledgeable person when it comes to cannabis production, the business of cannabis? How useful has that been to you? And would you recommend that people go for a similar sort of pathway if they are looking for a potential career such as yourself?
For me, the plant science is really integral. The way that I look at, even when I hire growers from my clients, I don't hire any growers that don't have a formal degree in plant science, agriculture, botany, horticulture, something. The reason being that if this is paired with some legacy experience or some legal experience growing cannabis, like that's perfect. But I like to have that base because cannabis is something that is still relatively new to grow on a commercial scale, the way that we're growing it now, for example, for GMP compliance. So, decreasing plant touching because we want to decrease the microbial load. There's other things that go in. So the way that we might be growing the best legacy cannabis in the world may not transition that well into a GMP environment from a labor perspective, from plant touching perspective, maybe some of the methodologies, maybe some of even the products used to grow that plant. So having the ability to be able to vet different solutions and to kind of predict or at least hypothesize what effect it's going to have on the plant can be really helpful. And that comes a lot of the time from a very core understanding of plant biology and experience with other crops. So usually if I have to honestly pick between two growers, and this is a very common CV comparison I'll have to do, I've got somebody that's maybe got like 5 years of legacy experience, but no formal training and no formal like work in any kind of agriculture environment. Or I've got somebody who's got maybe a degree in plants and they've got maybe a year or two in a greenhouse. I will typically pick that person because the cannabis knowledge is something to me that can be very easily trained, but the experience with running an environmental control system in a large scale grow, the background in plant biology and plant science, those are things that are harder for me to drill into somebody than like the protocol, because a lot of the consulting work that we do, we tell them, here is what you grow at, here's your environmental conditions, here's your CO2, here's your fertilizer, everything else. I always say that cannabis is a continual R&D because we are growing so many cultivars. So honestly, the most important thing is making sure that your client has a really good system for capturing data and comparing. So if you suggest, hey, like let's increase the light levels by 10%, I want to have as much as possible a true control, and then we compare the results at the end, because by cultivar, depending on the client's growth environment, because every single grow room is different, the HVAC, the lighting, et cetera, there's hundreds of factors that go into like why this grow room A would be different from grow room B. We really just essentially do these kinds of small scale trials. We start off with information that I have, that I've used successfully in other clients and other grows, in my own grows, and we use that as a baseline, but I'm always open for collaborating and tweaking. And sometimes my client might say, hey, I read this, and I'm like, let's try it. And I'm like, yeah, that's totally fine. I'm always happy to trial new things. Maybe it's going to work, maybe not. We'll let the results speak for themselves, and then we'll take it from there. So I think being open to a lot of new information is really important. And that plant science background, I think, again, just gives you that slight edge on figuring out if a suggestion makes sense, if it's going to be negative for the plant or it's going to be positive, and sort of the really microscopic interactions and things that are happening essentially, and how that would on a macroscopic level look.
Speaking of trying new things and challenging oneself, Tia, how could you talk us through the process of setting up your consultancy in AgCan and what the main driver was for that, and again how you found the process of working with these facilities on an international level? How's that sort of journey been? And then also, what do you think, if you'd known sooner, would have helped you the most, if that makes sense? What would you have liked to have known earlier on to make that transition and process more comfortable, maybe?
I have to say that I think I kind of fell into consulting almost by accident. So I really was unhappy at my last job, and I decided to leave because I just wanted to do something kind of on my own. And I actually was originally leaving to start up a electromagnetic radio frequency remediation company. So I was looking at developing a remediation technology for cannabis to reduce microbial load. And I was working with an investor, and we had come to agreeable terms verbally. So I've already put my notice into work. I had to give them a month because I was in the higher level team. And so I can't just, give 2 weeks notice, which is standard in Canada. So I think I gave a month or month and a half. As the date is ticking on, I think it was middle of November or end of November was my last day of work. I think a week or two before I'm supposed to leave, the investor and I get into a disagreement because now the physical contract he's handed over is completely different than what we discussed. And he wants to take on like 95% of the ownership, even though I'm the one that's going to be taking the machine, developing the technology, applying for the research license, getting my friends to give me product to trial essentially, and signing up the first few customers. And so I just kind of said like, no, this is not what we agreed to, and I'm not signing this. So I just felt like the negotiations weren't going very well. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to pass on this altogether. So here we are like a week and a half, I think, out of me like already quit my job, waiting for my last day to tick up. And I had always planned to like consult on the side while we were doing the trialing and stuff to keep myself busy. So I didn't really panic. I was like, okay, cool. So I just we gotta change paths here. That's all. I finished my last day of work with nothing lined up, and I decided to take the next month off because I really wanted to do my project management designation, which I strongly recommend that anybody who's considering doing it should do it, because I've always managed projects, but having the specific tools and kind of the step-by-step process and the 44 project management steps, it's been really helpful. And for those of my clients that actually understand project management and hire me for that specific reason, it brings a lot of value to those clients. And it is a sought after designation. I'm going to be honest, mine lapsed in December and I have to renew it. I've been very busy to do the renewal, but I am on it. And I got that done. I think I studied like for 3.5 weeks, like 14 hours a day. And I just wrote it and got it out of the way. And the second it was done, I was like, okay, so that was something that I wanted to do for like 2 years, finish that now. What am I going to do? So I put together a deck. And then I had a really good friend who worked at a cannabis investment firm who reviews decks, like, I don't know, 30 decks a day. I had him take a look. He gave me some comments and some feedback. I was really lucky that the marketing person, who is still my marketing person, she was at the company that I worked at, one of the parent companies, and she's fantastic. She helped me with my deck, my website, everything else for a very reasonable price. And I just shopped it around. I shopped it around to like 5 or 6 people that had offered me jobs when I left my last company. People who had immediately contacted me and said, hey, like, if you're not working here anymore, can we take you? And I said, no. So I said, hey, I'm not working for anybody right now, but I'd like to consult. And ended up signing my first client, which was a bigger producer in Canada that owned one of the other 1 million square foot greenhouses on the street of the one I just left. So it was really great. It was very easy for the first project. It was like, take what you know from here and transfer it over here. So they did have a different system. It was a project where I was revamping their post-harvest process for them, which has become an area that I've become very specialized in. And so that was a fantastic first project. And then right after that, it just kind of snowballed. So I've had projects all over. I've had, honestly, like, I'd say 95% of my clients have been super fantastic people to work with. They've been great to me just on a personal level. And they've also been able to allow me to work in so many different places. One thing that or 2 things I would say that are very important that I always remind myself is, and it's unfortunate, but in the cannabis industry, number one, everything has to be a formal written contract. I mean, we've talked about this prior, even if it's a friend. One of my tissue culture scientists for my first job actually is one of my consultants. She's a very, very good friend of mine. She has a contract. Everybody has a contract. There is no room for friendship in business, just in the sense that I don't ever want there to be this like kind of awkward thing where the client thought that I was going to cover that for free, but it's not free. Like I like everything very, lined up. So I paid for a really good contract to be drafted at the very beginning. And that was one of the first things I did. Definitely was important. And the second one was payment. So there actually is a firm in the US, and their entire purpose is to hunt down people in the cannabis industry that have not paid, because this is how bad it is. It became that everybody in Canada had lost money with cannabis suppliers and companies and stuff like that, that if you even mention you're a cannabis company, there are no credit terms. There is no, oh, we'll give you the product and get the payment after. It's payment up front. And I do the exact same thing. And it's not even from like a money, like greediness perspective, but I am a small business. It's just basically me and a few subcontractor consultants that I work with. But it's a very big deal for me not to get paid. It's not like I'm a multi-million-dollar corporation where I can write off like a $50,000 loss. That's money for me that I need. So I'm very clear about payment terms. I don't allow a lot of flexibility. I always ask for a retainer up front. If it's a brand new client, I can loosen it up over time. And I tell the clients flat out, that's why I'm doing it. I say, listen, I'm a small business. It's important to me that, my needs are met so that I can give you the best service possible. This is my retainer. After we've gone through this retainer, I've delivered this service. If everything's copacetic and we enjoy working together, we can talk about another agreement and go from there. But you have to be really firm on things like that, because I have just seen so many people. I've had friends who are consultants call me crying, saying they've lost like $100,000. They're on their last, $5,000. They've got a wife and a kid and they don't know what to do. And that's not something that any of us should have to go through, especially if you're good at what you do and you put in the time and the effort and the client owes you the money. It's just an awkward place to be in. So I would really recommend people get your contracts in place, make sure that you have your payment terms very clear. Understand as well what your value is, what you're bringing to the company, and get paid, what is in line with your experience and what you're bringing to the table. And then last but not least, get a good website and a good business card, because that does hold a lot of weight. I remember when I first started, one of the first things I did was I did a website and business card. And I had other friends who were consultants and they didn't understand why I put the money out for that. But image is really important, especially in something like consulting. And you don't want your clients to think, if you can't afford to put up a remotely professional looking website, that doesn't give me a lot of comfort that you're doing like well, or that you're operating at a professional level, like a full-time consultant. So it makes me a bit wary of like giving you, money essentially, and whether or not you're going to deliver on the service. So, optics are really important, and it's important to put your best foot forward in any kind of, any materials or anything that's going in front of your client.
Thank you, Tia. That was a very insightful rundown. So I don't think people who look from the outside in to the cannabis industry appreciate just how challenging it can be, how turbulent it can be, how untrodden a lot of the pathways and processes are for sort of working in the industry, and almost how experimental it is sometimes when it comes to just what can we actually do here, what are the options, because it's brand new and there's a lot of potential developments, collaborations, innovations that come about. And like you were saying, there's stuff changing all the time, and factoring that in and incorporating new information's really fundamental to succeeding and differentiating as well. Now that you've moved to Thailand, Tia, perhaps you could enlighten people as to the current state of cannabis in Thailand, and maybe what drew you to Thailand other than the obvious beautiful sun and beaches. How's that process been, and how do you find the Thai cannabis industry that everyone's talking about now and very excited by? How do the sort of expectations match up with reality?
Yeah, I came to Thailand 5 years ago. It was like kind of my first big trip after I got my like first job in food. And so a friend was doing teachers college in New Zealand, and we met in Thailand together. He was a friend of my master's, and we went for like a 2.5 week backpacking trip. And I came back from that trip and I told my family, one day I'm going to move to Thailand. And I meant like when I was like 60, like when I was retired. I didn't think at any point in time there would be a chance to move there earlier than when I was retired. So it didn't dawn on me to even consider it. Then I came back again last year. There was a conference that I went to in February, and I met up with some of my Australian business partners. And they said, look, we really want to do something in Thailand, but we need someone to move here. And I was like, I'll move here. And they're like, they thought I was joking. They're like, there's no way. And by the end of the trip, like 2 or 3 days later, I was like, yep. So I talked to my partner, we're going to move here. And they were like, what? So for me, it was like a dream come true. They thought I was crazy to make such a decision so quickly. But I'm just one of those people where I always feel like if something doesn't work out, I'll still learn something from it and it'll still be a valuable experience. So for me, I was like, okay, worst case, things don't work out in Thailand. I just moved back to Canada. Like, I mean, there's not really a downside of this. There's always lessons learned, even if something fails or doesn't go well. I just think there's a lot that you can take from any experience that you have that's new. So basically, my partner, my cat, and I packed up in August last year, and me and Mr. Miyagi flew into Thailand, and we've been here since. So we're going to hit 6 months in a couple of days, I think. So it's been about half a year. That's crazy to me that it's been half a year already, because this time has just absolutely flown by. Quickly. Yeah, I feel like these years are just kind of going quickly, but it's been great. The food has been amazing. The weather has been amazing. The people have been amazing. I'm learning Thai as well, so I can say a couple sentences here and there and actually have small conversations. I'm intending to stay here for a while unless plans change or something else comes up, but I really like it here and could see myself staying here in the long term. As for the cannabis, I came here, yes, partially for the cannabis industry. It's pretty Wild West as of right now. So there are regulations in place, but they're not enforced. And that's also where there's been a lot of this, I want to say kind of like drama or kerfuffle the last few weeks. People have been calling me and texting me like crazy because they've heard that, oh, they're going to ban recreational cannabis. A lot of the stuff that they said they're going to be doing is in the current laws. It's just that nobody's following them. So there's not actually a big difference from, what is actually supposed to be happening to this new law. There are going to be some changes, but from people who are Thai, who are here in the cannabis space, I've spoken to dozens of people at this point about what they think is going to happen. Nobody is worried. It's really only people who are online, who are not here, that are worried. I haven't met anybody in Thailand that is very concerned about these potential changes. So I think it's going to be pretty much business as usual. I would imagine in the supply chain, the biggest change will be more on the retail side, because they are violating a lot of existing rules already with respect to like how consumption happens. And, you know, Thailand really just doesn't want to become, you know, known as a super large cannabis recreational hub. And I remember someone sent me a video on Instagram a few days ago, and it was two people on a bike in Bangkok, I think. And the guy in the back is holding a huge bong and smoking out of it. And he puts the bong mouth to the driver, and the driver takes a hit of the bong. This is the kind of stuff that nobody wants to see in their country. So these are the kinds of things that, you know, they want to crack down on. I don't want to say that like what Thailand did was a mistake, because it really was like this countrywide experiment, which was very fascinating to kind of, you know, legalize and be very lax on enforcement for, you know, a year and a half, almost 2 years, and just see what happens. That was another reason why I wanted to move here. I don't think any other country will do this ever again. So this is a historic time in the cannabis like history of this industry to come and see it in real life and see what it's like, because the freedom right now with consumption will not happen in many other countries, if ever, but maybe not in the next 5-10 years. So I'm pretty happy with my move. I'm very glad to be boots on the ground. I definitely think Thailand is one of those places that if you're not physically here, you don't really know what's going on. So it gives me that insider, you know, what's happening and what's really happening versus what's on the internet. So far, so good. Yeah, liking it.
How do you think, and what do you think Europe could maybe learn from the pretty, oh, it's not an extreme change, but it's would be considered maybe radical in terms of general international policy changes, where it's just sort of, well, look, we don't want to regulate it at all, and just sort of allow it to take its own shape in a way? How do you think there's something valuable there that Europe could learn from that, as Germany's, for example, talking about social clubs, and, well, social clubs are popping up more around Europe as well, the UK. Do you think that there's any, well, I don't see European governments taking the same approach that Thailand has, but do you think there's any lessons that could be learnt there, and any perhaps interventions that could be benefited from by Europe that maybe Thailand's implemented that we haven't yet taken that step with?
I think one of the biggest things, and one of the reasons that I, despite the fact that I don't feel it was the best way to do it, one thing that I will applaud Thailand is the fact that they did it indicated that they did not feel cannabis was a super dangerous product. And that is a very big step, because despite the fact that it's legal in Canada, and a lot of Canadians will tell you this, it feels like it's morphine or something a lot stronger because of the restrictions we have, you know, for the advertising, the marketing, even going to a cannabis store. You can't go in if you're under the age of 18, but you can go into the beer store, the liquor store with your parents, right? We can't have glass. You can't see inside the store. It makes it very, it makes it feel very much like the government was like, okay, you can have this, but we think it's bad for you. And in Canada, we have limits of how much you can buy. So at any given time, if you go to a store, what you can have on you for roaming around for possession is about 30 grams of cannabis. Don't get me wrong, it's a sizable amount of cannabis, but imagine you live like in Canada's bush, you know, middle of nowhere. You live in Crown territory, there's no one around, and you don't want to have to drive into town 2.5 hours to go pick something up, you know, every month or so. You want to just buy a bunch of it at once. Or let's say you want to have edibles. Edibles, they recently are working on changing that. But at the beginning, when they brought out edibles, which I'm a very big fan of, you could only buy 5 cannabis beverages at a time. So if you're having one every day, every 5 days, you're having to go back and buy some more. I'm an adult. I can make decisions for myself. If I wanted to, I could go to the liquor store and I could buy 18 bottles of vodka and nobody would say anything to me. But I can't buy more than 5 cannabis strengths. And the cannabis strengths that I use are under 2 milligrams. So they're extremely light. Like, it's just a little, I don't really drink wine, but I would say it'd be equivalent to less than a glass of wine before bed, just kind of like a taking the edge off sort of thing. And I was doing like edible reviews on my Instagram for a while, which was kind of fun because I'm a big foodie.
You should check Tia's Instagram out as well, by the way, guys, while we're on the topic.
It's more travel focused now.
Pretty good fun, yeah.
But yeah, I used to do like edible reviews and stuff because I think edibles, I'm a big foodie and I'm a big cannabis fan. So like combining those two things is always good in my opinion. But you know, when you tell somebody this product's legal and it's safe to use, but you can't decide as an adult how much you want to buy, there's undertones there. We know what you're trying to say. We understand that you're still trying to remind us that this is not good or is potentially dangerous. A part of that I will give them credit for, which is like, there isn't a lot of clinical data with respect to like what is an overdose per se and like how much is dangerous to use, but there is for alcohol, and you still let me buy as much alcohol as I want. So I mean, at some point, you know, even if you've legalized it, if the underlying attitude is still that it's like not a good product, the consumer can feel that in the way you're regulating. So Thailand, again, wouldn't recommend anyone adopt this model, but I do really appreciate that they were like, we don't think this is going to cause like mass amounts of deaths or like injury or, you know, problems. So we're just going to like leave it and see what happens. But I think the other really important thing to remember is that a lot of what we're seeing now is not what was intended by the law, and enforcement is just not happening. So it's not like the government of Thailand was like, smoke cannabis wherever you want and do whatever you want. That was people interpreting what they wanted to, and the fact that the government has not yet been cracking down on it. So I think people just thought the cannabis law in Thailand was like, do whatever, and they just like, they put it out. There were some restrictions. They're not being followed, but there were restrictions in place. I generally like the attitude that it's not that bad. Let's see what happens.
No, it's it's quite refreshing to hear and see, because I remember, well, the main reason they are scared to make changes in the UK is they're worried that there's going to be mass psychosis if everyone starts consuming cannabis legally, and there's going to be cars and deaths and murder and destruction everywhere if they did that. And then I think Thailand's shown quite simply that that's not the case, and that a semi-relaxed approach isn't going to endanger the public and isn't going to lead to the downfall of Thailand and the collapse of the country.
Well, that's
you can
why
go
I
to
always
the
wonder why
extreme
Europe
and sort of
doesn't use Canada as an example. Like it's been legal there for 5 years. We haven't seen like a skyrocket in anything like related to cannabis. So I always get really confused. Like one of my clients is in Switzerland, and they're always doing these adult pilot projects where they're like, we're going to let like a handful of people have access to cannabis. Like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, what do you imagine will happen, that you'll legalize cannabis and the next day people will like all quit their jobs and go in the middle of the street and start setting buildings on fire? Like what, like I want to know, and what exactly the worry is here, especially because Canada has a population of almost 40 million people. It's been 5 years. Nothing really bad has happened, at least to my knowledge. And it's regulated and it's controlled, and many people use it. So I always think like Canada is your pilot trial. It's right there, and the information is readily available for free on the internet. I think you should be using, you know, stuff like that, and maybe even Thailand is kind of like they did the work for you. So instead of not wasting time, and instead of taking that extra time to do it yourself, just use these test populations that already exist.
Yeah, it's a shame, really, because I think it's that fear of change, fear of the unknown. Whereas, I like how sort of bold Thailand's been, and then look, we'll sort out any kinks and tweaks along the way that need to be updated and sort of matched. But it's interesting how, it does come down to the actual enforcement of the law as well. There's tons of, in all these countries where cannabis is illegal, especially across Europe, there's tons and tons of consumption illicitly and through the self-reliant market anyway. And we're sort of pretending like just because it's illegal, no one's consuming cannabis, even though tons and tons are moving through the country every year. So it's, interesting how these sort of, I guess, political scopes don't always align with the sort of social reality of what's going on. And then, all the fear and narratives around that are quite interesting to sort of see the conflicts of opinions and ideas and approaches to different things like that. I suppose, Tia, this brings us onto the wonderful ICQSA and all of the problems that you'll be tackling now with the association, and that we'll be tackling now with the association. For you, what was the main driver and reason that you felt that a new form of association needed to be created? And as well, what were some of the issues that you saw across the world in your sort of day-to-day work that made you feel as though that this was a necessary solution, and that it was the right direction for the industry? Because I think everyone agrees, but just to put it in perspective for people who maybe don't know the industry as well as yourself, and people who are maybe thinking, oh, I'm quite interested in the cannabis industry, but what are we missing? What do we need? And what are the paths forward? And what's the future of the industry? Would you be able to enlighten people as to the mission and purpose of the ICQSA, and your underlying motivations for putting together such a lovely organization?
Yeah, so for me, having worked in a lot of different countries, read a lot of different regulations, dealt with the challenges in a lot of different markets, I just kind of realized, number one, like I said, a lot of the time we're repeating that same kind of bad behavior pattern over and over again. It doesn't seem to be getting any better. New markets come online, we're hopeful they're going to do something smarter, and then they don't. And that could just be because, you know, they don't have anybody who's helping them draft policies or standards that has really experience from these more mature markets to give some guidance. A lot of it really has to do with the fact that I think a lot of countries are trying to go it at their own, or, you know, try something a bit different. But again, they're not getting that stakeholder buy-in or stakeholder input, I should say, from other people in the industry who are more advanced. So that was one problem I noticed right off the bat. And the other was just like, there's a lot of this working in silos. So even though there are problems that we see in multiple industries and different markets, they're not like coming together to solve that problem. They're just working on it on their own. And so I think for any industry to have a lot of weight and to have a lot of actual bearing on the next steps of that industry is to come together and form something like this. So the International Cannabis Quality Standards Association, or the ICQSA, came to me, I think in the summertime last year. And I just said, like, I want to get together a group of cannabis thought leaders, people who have industry experience, who have, you know, education, experience, and skills respective to their roles. And I want to develop some best practices. So best practice guides are not something that is new. Of course, they have them for pharmaceutical, automotive, they have them in pretty much every industry. But I wanted to pull a group together and basically establish working groups and tackle different topics. So consumer packaging and labeling, patient education, cannabis grading, cultivation, tissue culture, etc. It's been a long enough time. A lot of us have, you know, 5 years of experience in cannabis, and of course other markets have even more experience in that kind of just more medical focus. In Canada, for example, even that's another 10 years. But there's been enough time, there's enough of us who have experience to at least come together and say, okay, look, if we get, you know, 6 or 7 industry leaders together and they talk about what the best practices are for cultivation, they should be able to piece something together. It might not be, you know, that you can just copy paste that into your facility, but it should be giving you that kind of general idea of what you should and shouldn't be doing, or things that you should be looking into. A big one is facility design. I cannot tell you how many facilities I go into that are so poorly designed they can barely grow in them, and they're just battling the elements essentially inside of their purpose-built facility, which makes no sense. So we want to just kind of help reduce the amount of, I guess, like initial floundering that happens when either new markets come on or people come on in new markets that don't have the education or experience or the resources maybe to hire a consultant to help them. So just laying that like very basic groundwork. And then the hope is also that, you know, concurrently while we do this, so we will be launching in about 2 weeks formally, like on LinkedIn, and like, you know, kind of little peek behind the curtain, because a few people, obviously, like yourself and some of the founding members, have been in the know for a little while. We'll be doing our formal launch in 2 weeks, and then we'll essentially be looking to get some more members onboarded between February, March, with April being the first launch date of a working group. And we're hoping to have a couple best practice guides churned out by the end of the year. And while we're doing that kind of in the background, we're also going to be talking to policymakers and regulators in emerging markets and existing markets and saying, hey, do you want to talk to a group of people that have a lot of experience in different markets that can either help you draft or help you review your regulations and your policies? Because I think that's what's really missing. Sometimes if somebody's drafting a policy or a law, they will bring in a group to consult. A lot of the time it's a group from their own country, or it's a select group from outside. But again, it's a typically small amount of voices. It's not dozens of people, it's a few people. And I would never say that I myself as a standalone person would draft the best cannabis policy in the world. I think it's really important to have that collaboration with other people and to also bring that information in from other markets. So it's not just a bunch of Canadian people that are coming together. You're obviously from the UK. I have some other Canadian members. I've got some from Australia. I've got some from Europe. So we're really trying to get that nice, like well-rounded, to also make sure that we don't have any blind spots when it comes to challenges that are being faced in certain markets. So I'm really focusing on bringing together a truly international group, being able to develop best practice guides that will be free, available for anyone to download, to read, to use however they would like. And then to also side by side help some emerging markets, governments, lobbying groups, anybody who wants some advice or guidance on their regulations and policies, that's what we're here to do, is to give that advice. Even if it's just, hey, this is the full draft, give it a quick read over and tell me the red flags here. We're happy to do that. So we're hoping that this is going to be the kind of moving the needle forward for the global industry altogether. We do hope, of course, that some people adopt our best practices when they're drafting their regulations, and we can create some more consensus as well. I mean, one thing that like really irks me, that it drives me up the wall, something as simple as a delineation between hemp and cannabis changes country by country. And so, for example, a producing product in Switzerland, it's 1% is the limit for THC before it counts as high THC product. But then in Germany, it's lower than that. So people are like washing their cannabis with chemicals to strip the THC out to ship it across the border. These kinds of things are not super safe for consumers, and they shouldn't be being done, basically. But they're happening because even though these countries are touching, they have a drastically different requirement. So, you know, if we can come together as a group and say, hey, our best practice is that it should be this. I'm not saying every country is going to uptake it overnight, but I am saying that we're at least putting kind of something on the horizon to work towards, that we can kind of converge if it takes 5, 10, 15 years. Right now, no one's converging. Everyone's doing their own thing. No one is saying this is where we should all be kind of, you know, pointing the boats towards and working in this direction. And that's kind of where we want to come in.
For people that would like to participate here and join in with the association, where should they begin their journey? What should they maybe need to have experience-wise, resource-wise? And are there new partners that you're looking for in specific areas of the world or specific disciplines of cannabis at the moment that you'd like to sort of encourage people to reach out to you and participate in this lovely association and with this cross collaboration of international experts and multidisciplinary perspectives? What should they do? Who do you need?
So if they're looking to apply, so it is not an association that's essentially like an open membership. It is closed. That means that you will have to go through an application process. It's very important to us that we find the right groups to work with, and also groups that, again, when a regulator is looking at the association as a whole, they feel that, you know, this is a group that has the knowledge and expertise and skills to provide us with guidance. So we're not looking to be a multi-hundred member group. We're looking for a relatively, you know, close-knit group of people, but we're always happy to evaluate new options and bring new people on board. So if they're looking to join, definitely go to LinkedIn and look up ICQSA to follow the page. There's nothing on there yet, but like I said, we're launching in 2 weeks, so there'll be more information coming out then. Or they can visit the website, www.icqsa.com as well. There should be a very short form applying for membership there. That will be enhanced as well in the next 2 weeks as we start to pull in more applications, and there'll be a membership vetting team as well that will go through each one. We are looking for members, I'd say all over the world right now, because membership level, we've kind of got 2 or 3 from each of the like major continents in cannabis. The one area that we don't really have people from on board yet would be South America and Africa. We are talking to groups there, but we haven't quite onboarded anyone at this point in time. And then we have Australia, but the rest of Asia. So again, I'm talking to a few groups in Thailand, some of my clients actually that may be coming on board, but we haven't onboarded anybody at this point in time. Once we launch in the middle of February, we'll be onboarding more people then. For backgrounds and expertise, we're anybody. So you don't have to be a cannabis grower. I'm a consultant, obviously, but I'm not a grower. Chris is not a grower. We're looking to bring in people from all over the cannabis supply chain. So we have fertilizer companies, we have trimming equipment companies, we have GMP co-packers, we have analytical testing labs. We want to have that really wide perspective, because the working groups are not going to be strictly focused on just cultivation and production. We're going to have working groups on everything, basically. As long as we have enough members together and they agree they want to start a working group on a certain topic, that working group will start. So any background is welcome to apply. I know that facility design is one that we are hoping to start up pretty shortly after we launch our first 2. So we're definitely looking for some people with a background in HVAC, who've done a couple cannabis facilities, you know, construction, mechanical engineering, things along those lines. That's definitely an area I'll probably be recruiting for in the next month or 2.
We were talking a little bit about flights and travels and trips. What might be the best opportunities for people to catch you when you do make it back over to Europe, and summer plans, travel plans? How can people catch you, Tia, in the meantime? And as well, a couple of events that you're attending. Where can people find you, Tia?
I mean, I moved to Thailand, so nobody could find me, Chris. No, so I will be at ICBC Barcelona, followed by Cannabis, because they're back to back. I then head over to South Africa. There is a cannabis expo in Cape Town, so I'll be doing that the following week. I will come back to Europe for a couple of trips that I need to do. And so I should be staying until the Cannabis Summit, which is in The Hague, which is in Amsterdam or near Amsterdam. And that I think that's around April 11th or 12th. And then I will be going from there to ICBC Berlin, which is the following week. So April, I want to say 15th, 16th. From there, I'm heading back home to Trinidad to visit my family, and then I'll be back in Thailand and back again in Europe for the kind of June season. I know, back again in Europe for the June season. So that would include Green Tech, CB Expo in Berlin. I think there's another cannabis summit happening at that time, and I think another one, a lot of them. So feel free to find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, as many as possible. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn. If any of you are going to be in Thailand, of course, at the end of this month, next month, sorry, there's a cannabis conference there. I will be there as well. So yeah, you can always message me on LinkedIn, and I should honestly have like a tour dates, like posts, like pinned on my LinkedIn at this point of where I'm going to be. But feel free to message me, and always happy to meet in person and chat about the association, cannabis at large, or of course, edible is my fave.
Yeah, that's the perfect bribery tool for Tia if you want to get us some cookies or brownies along the way.
Yeah, you want to try that? Sure, yeah.
some other creations. Tia, I think what we'll do is what we usually do is put all of the links and descriptions and ways of getting in touch with you into the video description, and then people can reach out to you. I can put people in touch with you, and we can talk more about specific details, specific groups, and getting them involved. A little question for you as well, Tia, to maybe wrap things up. Where do you see the industry going? What do you see the future of the cannabis industry looking like? And do you think there's any changes on the horizon for the way that cannabis businesses and the cannabis industry sort of operates at the moment? Are there any big trend changes that you see coming? And maybe as well, how do you see some of the policy changes affecting the rest of the industry and the rest of the market, particularly say parts of Europe, Africa, South America? How do you think that's going to affect the overall flow of the industry, but also the output and tools and innovations that come along as well?
Every time we have like a new market come online, or especially like a new continent has their first market come online, it rejigs the entire cannabis supply chain, because depending on where that country's strengths and skills are, it kind of fits into the supply chain and boots other people out. So for example, Germany was obviously taking most of their product from Canada at the beginning because they had to. And then as other countries have come online and legalized, now they're taking in product from other countries. Also, as Germany switches over to having their own social clubs, that will most likely decrease this, what was originally super huge demand we thought was going to have for medical, because people will be using social clubs instead. So to be honest, it's really difficult to predict what the trends will be. The trends are, as someone legalizes, stuff gets mixed up, basically. So Japan, for example, has got CBD, apparently is like a big craze right now. And it's kind of, people are mentioning there might be some medical THC that will definitely affect how the market in Asia is handled. Countries that are in, that have a low cost of labor. So there's obviously certain countries in Africa and South America, and of course, Thailand is an example in Asia, where the low cost of labor has made people think that it would be good to cultivate there for either biomass production or premium flower production, because any of the super labor heavy processes that are being done in Germany and Canada, where the cost of labor is higher, could be saved, down here. But some of the disadvantages that could happen in these other continents is, for example, getting GMP certification. There aren't a ton of European GMP auditors hanging around in Thailand. In fact, when somebody wants an audit here, the wait time for a German auditor we've been quoted is about 18 months to 2 years. Now, by the time you get that audit, is Germany still going to be taking product? Maybe not if they have their own social clubs, right? And also in that 2-year period, how many other European countries are going to come online? So it's very difficult to really map out what the export situation is going to look like, who's going to be dominant in the supply chain for different things. It's something that's kind of ever evolving and changing. All I can really advise is to keep on top of the regulations as best as possible, to have, a really well thought out strategy to work on establishing really good partnerships, because partnerships are so important. Even if your product costs a little bit more money, but the partnership is strong and you're producing consistent quality product, the buyer will pay more. They will, they'll say, okay, look, I know you're 20% more expensive than this other company, but like, because you have a good track record and a good history, this is, who I want to stick with. So I think it's true of any industry, but in cannabis in particular, the bonds are like very strong. I think it's one of those things where it's like forged in fire. We've all been through a lot. So those of us that have been around for a while, that are like, kind of veterans at this point, we kind of stick together and we want to work with each other and we want to have, good business relationships with groups that we really trust. So keep an eye out, keep, checking in on regulatory changes, make sure to be aware of what's going on. I know, for example, the US is a market where they don't, I think, pay a lot of attention to what's going on outside of the US. And to be fair, because they can't participate in the global market at this point in time, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep an eye on what's happening. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep up to date in what's coming up next. So one thing that I'm going to be doing is launching a podcast that we will also, I'm sure, have you on, but it will be talking about every market. So essentially, we're going to have every episode is a deep dive into not only what the regulations say in that market, but what's actually happening. Because there's always a bit of a departure between the regulations and what's actually happening. Even in Germany, and I won't go into detail with that now because it's quite a long whole spiel, but here's what it says on paper and here's what's actually going on. So we want to know what's actually happening in these markets and what people in that market think is going to happen, in the next 6 months to a year. So we're going to be doing, of course, the bigger markets, but I'm really keen to do the super small markets where they've got like one producer that's legal and it's like really tiny. And I think we also have to stop chasing the same markets. Like everyone who comes to me and says like, I want to sell product in Germany. I'm like, you're like the 85th person this month that's told me that. Only so many of you can. Okay. So let's look at some other options for you. Let's look at another place. We really have to look about the fact that it's going to be super saturated. Everything in Europe is going to be super saturated. The amount of people going in for GMP right now is crazy high. And if you're not in Europe yourself, it immediately puts you at a disadvantage because you're farther for the auditor to get to. And there's more of an established trust within Europe of buying other products from states and countries that are very close by that they can go and visit whenever they need to or pop in for a surprise audit, right? It's a bit of a trek to, fly from, Germany all the way down to Thailand for a surprise visit to check on a supplier. So I think that it's really good to just keep as much of a pulse as you can and keep your strategy flexible and open for changes. And again, being ironclad and saying, this is how it's going to be, this is how it's going to go, has never served anyone really well in cannabis.
Oh, thank you, Tia. I think you've done a good overview of your journey, Canada's journey, where Thailand's up to, what's going on in the state of the global industry, and then a nice little rundown of the future as well. Do you have any final thoughts for anyone, Tia, that you'd like to share, or maybe words of advice, warnings, or invitations, perhaps? Are there any concluding thoughts from yourself?
I would say if anybody wants to come visit me in Thailand, I didn't actually move here to hide, so feel free to let me know. I'm always happy to meet with other cannabis people that are coming to explore the market or to learn more about here. And I would just say always do your best to engage and connect with more people in the cannabis industry. It does nothing but serve you. I think any of the successes I've had has been from all the amazing connections that I have. The cannabis industry can be a very, very friendly place and very close-knit. So if you're new to the industry or you're, kind of figuring out what your next steps are, talk to people and network as much as possible and try to ask people for their experience and their information. People are usually very friendly and open to sharing.
Thank you, Tia. Well, we're all very excited for the launch of the ICQSA and very grateful to you as well for spending all the time putting it together over the last few months and putting all of your energy into building something that's useful for everyone, serves the industry, serves the public, and also solves a lot of the problems that the industry is facing at the moment as well. So thank you for all of your hard work, Tia. Thank you for spending the time to talk through everyone what's going on with Cultivation, what it's like, what your journey's been like. And yeah, I'd strongly encourage everyone to get in touch with Tia, at least have a look at the association, follow on LinkedIn, and there's lots of very exciting things to come as well. So thank you, Tia, for putting this little podcast together with me and taking the time to record all of this. And we'll put all of the descriptions, all the links, all of the ways of connecting with you into the description so that people can find you easily. And yeah, we'll look forward to the launch of the association and the coming changes and evolutions and international standards that we're going to be working on. So thank you very much, Tia. awesome work. Keep up the great
Thank you
job.
for having me.
And we'll see you very soon, and look forward to putting all this on LinkedIn, letting everyone know what's going on and what's to come. Looking forward to having you over in Europe as well at some point soon too. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. If you need Tia at all, make sure to go and get in touch with us through LinkedIn. We'll put some emails there as well. I'm sure you'll be saturated here with questions and wonders and ideas as well for the association and your consulting skills. So yeah, thank you very much. And we'll see everyone very soon in the next episode. Thank you, Tia.
Bye.